The desert wind rose without warning as Gideon Hale guided his exhausted horse through the broken gate. Dust and sand struck his face like small knives, dry and bitter, carrying a smell that made his stomach tighten. Blood, cold rope, rotting wood. The horse snorted and refused to move forward. Gideon lifted his eyes, and his breath stopped in his chest in front of the cabin. Two Apache women hung suspended in the air. Their arms were pulled wide apart, stretched past their shoulders, wrists bound tightly to rough wooden posts on either side. Thick ropes dug deep into their skin, darkened from strain and sweat. Their legs were tied apart as well, forcing their full weight onto their arms. Every breath they took made their bodies tremble. Not from cold. From pain that would not let them lose consciousness. Faded whip marks crossed their sun-darkened skin, deep red beneath layers of dust. Their heads drooped forward, not in surrender, but because their necks could no longer hold them upright. Each time the wind pushed through the clearing, the ropes creaked and the women's bodies shuddered, stretching the pain into something worse. Gideon stood frozen. His heartbeat sounded loud and slow in his ears, stronger than the wind. This was not a quick killing. This was a lesson. Pain meant to last until life gave up on its own. He looked around the clearing. No riders, no voices. Only the empty cabin behind him and two human beings left to die on the very land he had given everything to own. If he walked away, he stayed, his life would never be the same. Gideon Hale reached for the old knife at his belt. The blade caught the last light of the day, dull but steady. He stepped toward the first post, already knowing there was no turning back. He cut the rope with two short, firm strokes. The line snapped. The woman dropped hard. Gideon lunged forward and caught her against his shoulder, her weight heavy and lifeless. Her body was cold and stiff, her smell a mix of dust, sweat, and dried blood. She did not cry out. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. He cut the second rope. The other woman slid down more slowly, as if the rope had taken the last of her strength. With it, Gideon laid them both on the ground and knelt in the dirt, hands shaking as he worked at the knots biting into their wrists. The skin beneath was swollen and bruised deep purple. He had untied, trapped animals before, cattle, horses, but this was different. These were people. The first woman did not move. Gideon pressed his ear to her chest and listened. A faint heartbeat answered him, uneven but there. She was alive. The second woman opened her eyes. They were dark and clear, filled not with fear or pleading, but with sharp awareness. The look of someone who had already measured death and refused to accept it. Gideon dragged them inside the cabin and shut the door behind him. The iron latch clicked loudly in the empty room. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the scent of something abandoned in a hurry. He laid them on the floor, tore his undershirt into strips, and poured water over their damaged wrists to bring blood back into the skin. His hands were rough and scarred from years of labor. A lifetime of hard work, no savings, no family waiting behind him. He had spent everything he had on this land. Every winter, hungry. Every day grinding forward just to hold on. This cabin was all he owned. The conscious woman stirred. Her lips were cracked and dry, but her voice was steady. "They will come back," she said. Gideon straightened slowly and looked around the 4 wooden walls. Scratches marked the floor. One board near the corner sat slightly higher than the rest. He sat down in the only chair, elbows on his knees. 2 paths lay clear in his mind. One meant leaving and keeping his life. The other meant staying and paying whatever price followed. He looked at the 2 women on his floor, then at his own hands. For the first time, Gideon understood that some things cannot be bought, but can still be lost if you turn your back on them. Night fell faster than he expected. The wind outside had quieted, but the cabin felt restless. Not old, not forgotten. Left Gideon knelt and pressed his hand to the floor. The wood beneath his palm sounded hollow, not rotten. Empty. He pried up the loose board with his knife. It lifted too easily. Beneath it was a narrow space, just deep enough to hide something meant to stay hidden. He reached inside and pulled out folded parchment and a thin notebook. He spread them beneath the weak glow of the oil lamp. It was not a map of land. It was a map of veins, crude but confident lines marked digging paths, depth, and a clear symbol for silver. The notebook was filled with hurried notes, measurements, and test results. On the first page was a name, Samuel Hartwell. Gideon swallowed. He had heard that name in town. The man who owned this land before him. Behind him, the conscious woman had pushed herself upright. She stared at the map, not with surprise, but with something heavier. "They have known about the mine," she said. For a long time, Gideon turned to her. "Then why sell?" "They are not in a hurry," she replied. "They let fear do the work." She told him how the land had been sold cheap on purpose. 2 men with no families. No one to ask questions. If they vanished, the hanging posts were not meant to kill, but to warn. The last owner did not run, she said. He dug, he wrote, and he spoke too much. Gideon did not need to hear more. Everything made sense now. The low price. The silence in town. The way people looked at him when he said he planned to stay. He had not bought the wrong land. He had been chosen. Outside, a faint sound reached the cabin. Hooves settling on hard ground. No voices, no greeting. Just presence. Gideon folded the map and slid it inside his shirt. He stood, shoulders heavy but steady. The fear was no longer his. The hooves stopped just beyond the fence. A man's voice came from the dark. Calm and certain. "You do not need to hold that gun, Hale." Gideon tightened his grip on the old rifle. The woman leaned against the wall, breathing steadier now, eyes sharp. The other still lay unconscious on the floor. "We just want to talk," the voice said. A figure stepped into the edge of the lamplight. Long coat, hat, low. Fletcher Knox. Behind him, others spread out quietly, moving like men who had done this before. Gideon opened the door just enough for them to see each other. "You paid for the land," Knox said. "No one argues that. But there is something here that never belonged to you." He glanced toward the woman inside. "Hand them over," he said. "Then you live." Silence filled the space between them. Gideon closed the door. The latch clicked. Outside, the men began to move. The first strike came without warning. Wood exploded inward as the door tore free from its hinges, splinters flying across the cabin like dry leaves in a storm. Gideon stepped back just in time as a man rushed through the opening, carrying the smell of cheap whiskey and road dust. There was no shouting, only breath and motion. Fast, certain, familiar to men who had done this before. Gideon swung the knife. The blade tore through cloth, ripping a sleeve open, but missed flesh. The answer came instantly. A rifle butt slammed into his shoulder, heavy and exact. Pain burst white across his vision. He crashed into the table, chest hitting hard, breath driven out of him in a sharp gasp. Smoke began to rise as the oil lamp tipped and shattered. Fire spilled across the dry boards, crawling low and hungry. Nayeli moved. She did not scream. She drove her shoulder into a man rushing past Gideon, slamming him sideways into the wall. The impact shook the cabin. But there were too many. An arm wrapped around her neck from behind, yanking her backward. She struck an elbow into ribs, hit something solid. But before she could move again, A rope snapped tight around her wrist and pulled her off balance. She fell hard to the floor. Gideon tried to stand. A boot caught him in the ribs. His body folded inward. Another blow sent him sprawling. The rifle skidded away beneath the bed. He reached for it, but a heavy heel came down on his wrist. Pain shot up his arm, sharp and sickening. He clenched his teeth and stayed silent. Fire climbed the wall. Smoke thickened, burning his eyes and throat. The sound of cracking wood filled the room like time breaking apart. Nayeli was dragged upright, her arms forced behind her back, rope biting into skin already bruised. She searched for Gideon through the smoke. Their eyes met. No panic. Just understanding. Fletcher Knox stepped inside as if he were entering a quiet office. Calm, unrushed. He glanced at the spreading fire. Then down at Gideon, pinned to the floor. "You see," Knox said evenly. "Every landowner reaches this moment." Smoke blurred Gideon's sight. His lungs burned. He thought of the dirt road back to town, of all the men who had walked away before him. He could not move. His body no longer answered. The men began to pull back, leaving Gideon and Nayeli held down as the fire grew. Knox turned away, already finished with them, and then the sound came. At first it was faint, low, steady, almost lost beneath. The crackle of flames, a deep rhythm, slow and deliberate. Drums, one beat, then another, then many. The men holding Nayeli slowed. One turned his head toward the dark outside. Another followed. The certainty in the room shifted, thin cracks spreading through it. Dust rose beyond the fence, rolling low across the ground like a living thing. Shapes formed within it. Horses, riders, not rushing, advancing with purpose. Hooves striking earth in measured rhythm. Knox stopped and turned at the front road White Hawk. He did not shout. He did not signal. His presence alone changed the air. Behind him, Apache warriors spread out in clean formation, moving as one body shaped by long survival. Someone among the hired men whispered to fall back. It was too late. The clash was swift and exact. No wasted motion. No fear-driven chaos. Men who had moved with confidence in the dark now stumbled in firelight and dust. One fell, then another. The rest turned and fled, not from panic, but from understanding. Ropes were cut. Nayeli stood free, her shoulders shaking slightly, breath steady again. Gideon was pulled upright, coughing hard, lungs burning as smoke poured out of him. His legs barely held. White Hawk dismounted and stepped toward him. Their eyes met. No judgment, no praise. Only recognition of the choice Gideon had made. Knox was dragged down before he could draw his gun. His hat fell into the dirt. His hands were bound behind his back. The calm confidence drained from his face. Hands moved quickly to beat down the fire. The flames weakened. Smoke thinned. The cabin still stood, blackened but alive. Gideon stood among ash and hoofprints, swaying slightly. He had not won. He had simply stood long enough for the truth to arrive. As the dust settled, the desert grew quiet again, no longer silent in the face of what had been done. White Hawk gave a short signal. The night was not finished yet. Ash drifted slowly through the night air as the fire weakened and fell back into glowing embers. The cabin still stood, scarred and blackened, but unbroken. The desert wind shifted, carrying smoke away and leaving behind the quiet weight of what had just happened. Gideon leaned against a surviving post, his chest rising and falling in rough breaths. Every part of him ached, but the danger had passed. For now, White Hawk raised a hand. No words were needed. Two warriors stepped forward and dragged Fletcher Knox into the open space in front of the cabin. He was forced to his knees, wrists bound behind his back, his long coat streaked with dirt and ash. His hat lay forgotten at his side. The confidence he carried earlier was gone, replaced by a thin, calculating fear that had arrived too late. "Call them," White Hawk said. His voice low and steady. Knox hesitated only a moment before giving a short nod. Not long after, two riders approached from the direction of town. They came without noise or pride. Crane and Webb, men who had once spoken softly and smiled often. Men who had watched the land from a distance and waited for fear to clear it for them. They stopped when they saw Knox in the dirt. Their eyes moved to the broken posts where the ropes had hung. Then to Gideon, still standing in front of the cabin. They believed would drive any man away. Gideon knelt and lifted the loose floorboard. The wood was still warm from fire. He pulled out the notebook and the folded map and placed them on the ground where the firelight could reach. He did not speak. He did not need to. The lines of the silver vein were clear. The notes were hurried, but certain. Proof laid bare in the dust. Crane's face tightened. Webb swallowed and looked away. Neither tried to deny it. "You used fear to buy time," White Hawk said. "You hung the living to make the land go quiet." No one argued. The pattern was too clear now. Cheap land sold to men with no ties. Gallows meant to warn. Rumors meant to spread. Anyone who stayed was meant to disappear. "Take them," White Hawk said. Crane stepped back. Webb turned as if searching for escape, but there was none. 2. Warriors moved in quickly. Weapons were removed. Wrists were bound. Power left them as easily as dust shaken from a coat. Knox lowered his head. He did not beg. He understood the law of this moment. When fear fails, truth stands alone. White Hawk gave one last signal. The remaining posts were pulled from the ground. The ropes were cut and thrown into the fire. No ceremony, no celebration. Only an ending placed where it belonged. The night slowly released its grip. Dawn came quietly. Soft light spread across ash and scorched wood, revealing a cabin burned at the edges, but still standing. Part of the roof was gone. The walls were blackened. The foundation remained solid. Gideon sat on the front step, a rough bandage wrapped around his ribs. Each breath still stung, but the smoke was gone from his lungs. The air smelled of damp earth and cooling ash in front of the cabin. The ground where the hanging posts had stood was bare. Only faint marks remained, already fading. Naeli stood by the fence, her shoulders relaxed, hands open to the morning breeze. She watched the horizon where White Hawk and his people had ridden away in silence, leaving behind something stronger than promises. The other woman sat against the cabin wall now, awake and drinking water slowly. Color had returned to her face. Life steady and stubborn. A small group from town arrived as the sun climbed higher. They looked at the burned cabin. They looked at Gideon. Then they looked at the land they had avoided for so long. Some nodded. Others could not meet his eyes. None of them smiled the way they once had. Gideon stood slowly. There was no sudden fortune. No silver pulled from the ground. Only land no longer held by fear. He picked up a charred piece of wood and set it aside. Then another. That was how the work began. Naeli stepped forward and placed an old hammer in his hand. No words. He took it. They stood together, facing the cabin. Not perfect, not finished. But theirs. Later that day, Gideon planted a new post. Not for ropes, not for warnings, just to hold the fence straight. When the hammer struck the final blow, the sound rang clear across the land. Gideon stood still for a moment, then lowered the hammer gently. Some places do not choose us. Some places we choose to stay. Not because it is easy, but because it is. Right, the cabin remained beneath the wide sky. No longer a trap built on fear, just a home. And for Gideon Hale, that was enough.